Hey folks, Mark Locklear here with the screencast on Chapter 9, Structures and Enumerations. So we'll talk about structures first, and I'll sort of give you the broader, that's probably the bigger concept to wrap your brain around. And then I think what we'll do here for the coding exercise, I'll just do some coding examples, and I'll make this code available to you inside Moodle. If you want to download it and play with it, you can. But first, this idea of structures. We'll be talking about defining classes later. Toward the end of the class, we'll just do, we won't go real deep into it, but it's sort of a more advanced topic, but creating classes and this idea of object-oriented programming. Structures is sort of based on that. Structures is sort of a watered-down class or a watered-down object. It acts very much the same. And again, we're just introducing you to the concept here, so we're not going to dig real deep into it, but the idea of a structure is essentially, so we've created variables at this point, and a variable is simply some value that you want to save just to a single variable. This idea of a structure is going to allow you to create your own objects. These objects can have multiple variables assigned to them. And the way I like to describe both structures and classes are that they sort of mimic things out in the real world. So part of the challenge in software development is we're trying to build these systems, and generally these systems, they allow us to do stuff out in the world. And so a way for us to wrap our brain around all these different data structures and types and things is, as much as we can make them look like the real world and things that we already understand, then the easier it's going to be for us to write code and sort of model what those things do in our code. So with that being said, I'll share my screen here. So, okay, so we'll start out. And so I've got an example of an enumerator here. We'll add that. What we'll do is work that into the structure that I've got here. And so hopefully it'll make a little more sense. I'll talk about enumerators after we look at this example I've got of a struct here first. So again, this idea of we're trying to model what's out in the real world. So let's take a movie, and this is the same example they use inside the book too. A movie is a good example of that, right? If we're trying to represent, again, think about if we're trying to get our code to represent what a movie is, then how do we do it? Well, we're going to create this object or this struct that's called movie. In this case, we're going to give it a title and a year. Now, we're going to give it a rating here later on too, but I'll talk about that in a sec. But again, so the idea here is a movie has a title and it has a year. Now, you can just take a second and think about all the things that a movie might encompass, right? Beyond a title and a year, it could have a producer, it could have actors or actresses, that are acting in the movie. So those are sort of things and objects or variables, I should say, that are going to be represented inside of a movie. So the way we do this is first we declare the structure or the struct. That's what we're doing here. So again, we're going to call this movie, and then we're creating, in this case, two variables, title and year. Title is a string. Year is going to be an int, and that makes sense just because years are numbers, right? Now to actually, so this is just sort of the implementation of it. We haven't created a movie object yet. So now what we do here is you can see this movie one. So in this case, I'm calling it movie one. You could call it anything you wanted to. You could call it Star Wars or A Few Good Men or whatever you want. In this case, I'm just going to use the variable movie one. So we're going to, and you'll often hear the term instantiated. So we're going to instantiate this struct here. And then now we've got to actually set values for the variables that are associated with that movie. So here we've got movie one dot title is equal to A Few Good Men. So notice we have this dot. We tend to call this dot notation in software development. So here I can just do movie one dot. And in fact, so let's do movie one. Notice if I do dot, notice this title and year already becomes available to me. And that's because I've defined it up here, right? And in fact, if I come up here and I do, let's just do string, foo, I'm just going to call it anything, just some random word, right? I can go back here and say dot. Now notice foo becomes available to me here. So whatever I declare up in the movie structure, that that becomes available to me via this this dot notation. Okay. And then now for us to actually view this or do something with it, in the book again uses a more sophisticated example of this, but I'm just going to create a vector called movies, and then I'm going to add or push push each movie that I create to this movie vector. And then what that allows me to do is kind of convenient, is I can use a for loop to simply loop through the vector and then display the output. So that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to run this. And notice when I run this, I get this output. A Few Good Men was released in. Now notice I got 0 here. Well, that's because I haven't set the value of year. Right. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say movie one dot. Then I can choose year, and I'll set that equal to, and I think it was 1994. So actually, I think it was probably more like 92. And that is an int, not a string, so I don't need quotes. So now if I run this, my output should say released in 1992, okay? And again, I can create any variable I want associated with a given object. So again, you can sort of, if you sort of abstract this out, think about a car, let's say. So if you're trying to create a car structure, what are some attributes, are also a term we hear used. What are some attributes that are associated with a car, right? So make, model, miles per gallon, year, released. These are all things, these are attributes. And again, these are going to be things that are going to, again, think about from a data and a coding standpoint, these are going to allow you to represent a car, in code. So, okay, so that's a structure. Let's talk about enumerators. You often hear enumerators called enums or enums. And essentially what enumerators allow you to do is, and I think the screencast, when you go to the coding exercises, I'm linking to a LinkedIn Learning screencast there. I think he does a good job explaining. But generally, if you want to sort of limit what the options are that a developer has for assigning a set of values to a variable, then that's when enumerators are often used. So in this case, how could we apply this to the movie object? We've got, well, rating might be a good example of that, right? There's only a set number of ratings that a movie can have, G, PG, PG-13, R. I think those are all, but for the sake of what we were doing here, let's just say we want to limit them to those. So again, if I'm writing a movie program for a website, let's say, I want to limit what the developer can make available as far as a rating for a movie goes, right? So that's where an enumerator really comes in handy. So I'm going to go ahead and define this up top. So you can define these as classes or as just a straight enumerator. That's what I'm doing here. Notice I'm not using the class keyword. And then you notice as for my options here, I've got G, PG, PG-13, and R. So now if I go in and, okay, so now for my structure, I need to add a rating attribute to that object or to that structure, right? So that's what I'm going to do here. Now notice I'm using this capital R rating. That references that's because the type here, notice the type for these other attributes are string and int. So the type for this is going to be the rating type, which is going to be based on this enumerator that I've created. And I'll just call it rating in this case. That makes sense, right? I could call it anything I want, but rating makes sense. So that's what I'll use. And then notice I'll just start typing it out here so you can see. So now I can do movie one dot rating. So notice rating is an option now using that dot notation is equal to, and yeah, G. And notice the options the options for my rating show up as options here too. Like if I do R, yeah, notice those are all options here. So let's see, I think A Few Good Men was probably PG, so I'll just say PG. And then I'll say that. Okay, so now I've got a valid object here. And again, if I wanted to print that out, we'll do something like, so here we'll say it was released in m.year, and I'll say, and the rating is, and then here we'll do m.rating. Okay, and then if I run this, okay, so now notice here something's kind of funky is, so you can see the output here, A Few Good Men was released in 1992, and the rating is 1. Now, the reason that is, and again, the book goes into more detail on this, is essentially you're getting an element. This is similar to elements in vectors or arrays. They start at 0 and go up. So for instance, if I were to change this to G, then I would get the rating is going to be 0. So let's see what that looks like. Yeah, so notice that. So what I'm getting is the place in the order that the enumerator is in. So now there's a whole other set of code. You need a function or some other set of code that would actually convert this from these element numbers to the actual text that's involved. That's sort of outside the scope of what I want you to get, at least for this screencast, but you'll see more examples of it inside the book, and then also on the LinkedIn Learning screencast that I'm linking to. Okay, that is going to be all for now. Again, just again, I'll make this code available to you if you want to play with it some. We're getting into some more advanced topics here, so don't get too stressed out about trying to wrap your brain around it. Just sort of take it at face value as to what it does. Again, this is more sophisticated code, such that if you have a larger systems and you're really trying to do from an engineering perspective, these are all sort of concepts and methods you would implement it at a fairly high level. So that is all for now. And if you have questions, let me know. Thanks.